it still looks hot next week. It looks like a different heat. Maybe this is going to be more of the pop-up thunderstorms or at least a chance for rain. So if there's one nice thing about maybe early April, it looks like it's still hot, but maybe we'll have moisture.
That's a good point. That is something that could start to happen, kind of more like a summertime day where you see some stuff kind of bubbling up, probably in the mountains, and then they kind of migrate a little bit closer to the Piedmont. There's probably a severe weather signal with that as well, not so much for us, but more so in the middle of the country where you have that battle zone. We'd probably be firmly in the warm side and maybe not dealing with that as much, but it does look like a big change. And that's just next week, right? So that's just about a week away. And you wonder if someone gets 90 again, too.
I actually had to put 90 on my 10-day. So next Thursday, I put 90 in there just because, especially next Wednesday, Thursday looks pretty toasty down this way. And we'll have to keep an eye on it because next week Artemis 2 is scheduled. The launch window opens on Wednesday. With that kind of pattern, we're probably going to have pop-up storms in Florida, too, Tim. So Artemis launch will be something we'll have to watch carefully as well because that could be an issue. Before we leave, I wanted to point this out because I was glad to see national media start to talk a little bit about Hawaii. I wanted to show an interesting graphic because I pulled up the 7-day rainfall for the not the big island, but the island of Oahu, which is the most popular island because it has the big city of Honolulu, Pearl Harbor. Look at some of these totals, Tim, on the North Shore of the island. And this is a 7-day rainfall total. Some of these totals were 15, 20, 26 inches over 7 days. They said this is some of the worst flooding they've seen in over 20 years. And this is where most of the people in Hawaii live. It's kind of called the city island because it is urban. There's the only interstate on the Hawaiian Islands is on this island. And so it was just crazy to see these numbers and to pull them up. I was like, wow, that is a lot of rain. And I was actually visiting this island last summer, so I know some of these areas. In the middle of the island is the Dole Plantation, the North Shore, and then Waikiki Beach is southeast of Honolulu, Diamond Head. These are all famous areas on the big island of Oahu.
Crazy, and you can see on the south side there was less than an inch at one of the sites, so it's really dependent on the direction of the wind, how you're getting that rainfall to go up and then to go down. But gosh, that's a disaster to get anyone to get 10 to 15 inches of rain. That's too much to handle.
Yeah, and imagine trying to get resources out there. They were saying FEMA's helpful, but they're on the mainland. They got to get out to the island. It's hard to get out there. So that will continue to be a story as we talk about that as well. So we're almost out of time today. Tomorrow, stay tuned. Tim and I will probably be talking and dissecting the drought monitor update. Stick around. We've got more news coming up.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for Live Impact News. I'm Vanessa Rufus. We'll be together until 9 o'clock tonight, taking a look at all of your big breaking feeds and local headlines that we're covering for you today. We've got for you to start a local panel, which we previewed actually last week here on WCNC Plus. So for folks who caught that discussion about the interfaith panel that was getting underway tonight, an effort to get folks from the community out, interacting with each other, asking tough questions. A lot of this will focus on major headlines that we're seeing both nationally and internationally. And it looks like we do have one of our speakers that we're seeing at the podium. This is Layla Ali, a community organizer also with Charlotte United for Palestine. And this is a panel called The Black Experience, Leadership, Palestine, and Truth Telling. Let's listen in right now.
1 million people displaced from their homes. They have not made a single mainstream media headline over the last month. We refuse to accept a world where that kind of suffering becomes normalized. Tonight is about refusing that normalization. It is about creating a space for honest dialogue without anti-Semitism, without Islamophobia, without anti-Black or anti-Palestinian rhetoric. It is about holding complexity without losing our moral center and recognizing that what happens globally is not separate from what happens locally right here in Charlotte, in our communities and in our relationships. Because solidarity is not just a concept, it's a responsibility. And if we are serious about justice, then we have to be willing to listen, to learn, and to stand together, even when it's uncomfortable, especially when it's uncomfortable. Thank you all for being here, for showing up with open hearts and open minds. I want us to begin, and we will begin with our first speaker. We'll go over the objectives, actually. So, kind of like what I reviewed, we're going to be speaking about faith as a moral compass, Black liberation and global solidarity, media power and narrative control, and local impact, local responsibility. I want this to be a safe space. I want everybody to be heard. We'll be having an open Q&A at the end of this session. We're going to give time for you all to engage with our speakers, more than just listening to them and to what they have to tell you all.
Folks just wanted to pop in here. Vanessa Rufus speaking in the Live Impact News studio. This is a live unedited feed. This is our camera person, obviously there on scene. And at some points throughout this, you might see him pick up the camera, move around, refocus, get different angles as we are trying to record some of this for our shows later in the evening. So thanks for bearing with us. Just wanted to point that out.
This group here at Friendship. We really appreciate being in this space with you all, and thank you for having the courage to host our community. All right? All right, so our first speaker is Mr. Jibril. I will let him take it away. The way our forum is going to look like, we're going to hear from each speaker, and then at the end, we will have structured questions and an open Q&A. Thank you, guys.
In the name of God, who is most merciful and most gracious, I greet you with Assalamu alaikum. Before I get started, I just want to thank Friendship Missionary Baptist Church for holding this historic conversation. Us in the interfaith community, we've been patient. We've had a revolutionary patience when it comes to speaking to things that are on our heart, especially when it comes to foreign wars, Palestine. Whether we're in political circles or religious circles, we've been told to wait or just ignore it. So again, this means a lot to us. Friendship for stepping up to the plate and opening their doors. So again, thank you very much. One cannot speak from our faith or ethnic backgrounds in truth without acknowledging the intersection of the struggle for justice. The struggle for justice is a universal principle. From Islamic history, the first man chosen to make the official first call to prayer was Bilal, that most people would say was a black man. The first place the early Muslims sought refuge was with a Christian king in Abyssinia. And we can go to the best models of Abrahamic faith and different ethnic groups working together, which was Islamic Spain. The Moors, I'm sure some of you have heard of, Muslims from North Africa, ruled Spain for nearly 800 years. This intersection of Muslims, Christians, and Jews, all contributing and working together, helped produce the European Renaissance. And it ushered into a period of enlightenment. And I would encourage anyone who loves to travel, go visit southern Spain. I did. It was like a pilgrimage to me, even though we don't consider it a pilgrimage, but it was like a pilgrimage. It brought tears to my eyes when I visited this place and saw what it once meant. Many Africans who were kidnapped and enslaved and brought to America were Muslims. Their desire for justice and freedom caused some to lead slave revolts. Then others found other ways to get their freedom, some even through the courts. Other Muslims from Africa came to the Americas way before Columbus and the transatlantic slave trade, but they did not come here on missions of conquest. As we look at contemporary historic figures for justice, we see they made the intersection with the call for justice. Malcolm X, who many reduced as simply a black nationalist, was much more. As he grew in his Islam and world travels, he was becoming an internationalist, intersecting the justice, the call for justice and freedom, the struggles of African nations, African Americans, and yes, Palestine. Malcolm visited Gaza. His reflections were this: the Palestinian struggle is not just a cry for justice, it's a blistering battle for the most fundamental human rights that every living soul on this planet should inherit by birthright. It's an unyielding resistance against the oppressive and the callous denial of the most basic human dignity. Just as the civil rights movement in the U.S. fought against the change of racial discrimination, so do the Palestinian people. Again, the struggle for justice is a universal and principled one. It was a protege of MLK, Jesse Jackson, may he rest in peace, that reminded us never again should also include the Palestinians. It was Nelson Mandela who made the connection of apartheid South Africa to the apartheid in Israel against the Palestinians. He said, "We know too well that our freedom is incomplete without the freedom of the Palestinians." Any student of Black history and Jim Crow in America will immediately identify the intersection with the apartheid of Israel and how Palestinians are treated. I remember speaking with North Carolina State Senator Val Applewhite about this as we discussed the Shalom Act. She was almost brought to tears, for she recognized this is why she did not vote to support that bill, along with the fact that it sought to redefine anti-Semitism and limit free speech. I think we are at a tipping point for a period of time in America and the world. While it is easy to point to the historic issue of racism, white supremacy in America, it is time that Zionism is faced with the same intensity, for it's just another branch from the same tree. Look at how they treat the Palestinians. Look at the influence they have on our government, from new laws that are being changed that are limiting our free speech to foreign wars that are taking place. And you can look no further than what's going on in Iran right now. Even people from the administration are saying Iran was not a threat. We did this for Netanyahu. It is time that Jews of goodwill and others, but I say Jews first because I think when real change happens, Jews of goodwill are the ones that can lead this change. I think their voice carries more weight. We have to look at the evils of Zionism and Jewish supremacy, just like we do racism and white supremacy, and work against it. Just as many white Americans have had to do the same with the institution of racism and white supremacy in America. Yes, this means sometimes being ridiculed and rejected by friends and family, but it's necessary in our struggle for what is just. Let us be a people who are grounded in our faiths while being united by the fundamental principles of justice, freedom, equality, and human dignity. While there is an intersection and a universal and spiritual shared struggle for justice, freedom, and equality, we must guard against from ever co-opting someone else's pain and struggle for our own political agenda. From sea to shining sea, from the river to the sea, let us all treat justice equally. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jibril. Our next speaker is Dr. Barry. We welcome him, and we welcome the community that he's a part of as well. So thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. I would also just like to extend my gratitude to our hosts, to the organizers of this event, my fellow panelists, and all of you for participating in this conversation. I speak to you tonight as a Jewish historian of the Jewish past and of anti-Semitism in the Nazi Holocaust. And as someone who has spent his career trying to understand how historical suffering shapes political identities and alliances. In my opening statement, I would like to make this central claim. The story of how many Jews of European ancestry were incorporated into American whiteness after World War II is intimately tied to the story of Black-Jewish relations and also to the story of Palestine. But I want to begin with a counter-history that Zionism and its institutional allies, both within and outside of Jewish communities, have worked hard to suppress. I take my solidarities from a Jewish tradition that favors equality over supremacy and community over separatism. It can be found among Yiddish-speaking labor radicals who stood on picket lines alongside Black workers because they understood that their liberation was inseparable from each other's. It lives in the Jewish activists who joined in the defense of the Scottsboro Boys and who organized in the Jim Crow South, not as benefactors, but as comrades. It lives in the tradition of figures like Joe Slovo, the white South African Jew who fought alongside Nelson Mandela to end apartheid. It's with the Jewish activist groups who were among the first to protest Israel's genocide in Gaza. These Jews did not offer a conditional alliance. We understood in our core that there's no Jewish freedom in a world that denies it to others. This tradition has been deliberately marginalized by Red Scares, McCarthyism, Cold War liberalism, and by the post-war embrace of whiteness by many American Jews and into Zionist institutional power. As Jews gained access to opportunities that were denied to Black Americans after World War II, such as the GI Bill, suburban housing, and access to elite universities, many Jewish institutions made a fateful calculation of choosing Zionism as a strategy of Jewish safety in spite of its violence towards Palestinians. In this framework, Black radical critiques of Western imperialism, which include Israel, and which stemmed from Malcolm X, the Black Panthers, SNCC, and then later through Angela Davis and Reverend Jesse Jackson, became recast as threats to Jewish safety. This framework served a political purpose. Jewish legacy institutions like the Anti-Defamation League and the Federations promoted a Holocaust memorial culture that elevated Jewish suffering above all other victims and cast Israel as the only guarantor of never again. The effect was to redefine anti-Semitism itself so that critiques of Israeli state power became, by definition, hate speech. This history remains with us today. I would also like to say something about representation. I don't claim to speak for the entire Jewish community tonight, and that's because there is no singular Jewish community. It doesn't exist and has never existed. We're a diverse people holding many views, and any attempt to insist on a unified point of view is a reassertion of anti-Semitic logic that insists Jews speak with only one voice. Recent polling by the Jewish Federation itself confirms this. It shows that only 37% of American Jews identify today in the United States as Zionist, while a quarter identify as non- or anti-Zionist. The vast middle hold complex, contradictory, and rapidly shifting views. Just as Reverend Paul does not presume to speak for all Christians and Jabril for all Muslims, I make no such claim for Jews. What I do claim, and what I will insist upon, is that the ethical traditions of Judaism, just like those of Islam and Christianity, demand that historical suffering must generate solidarity with the oppressed, and not justifications for systems of authoritarianism or racial supremacy. It is that suppressed tradition of genuine solidarity, of linked fate, and of collective liberation that I believe we are here to recover tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berry. Our next speaker will be Reverend Dr. Paul McAllister. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
All right, that's how we do it at Friendship. All right, so I'm so happy to be here with this wonderful panel, and I'm so glad that Layla El Ali, I'm a boxer, so we used to say Ali. Tonight I want to talk about the social gospel. The social gospel is the belief that Christian ethics can and must be applied to the redemption and repair of broken systems of society. The social gospel is why I am here, not only as a member of this congregation, but why I'm here with you tonight and in solidarity with those of you who seek justice and freedom and liberty for all. The social gospel is not some distant theology or abstract moral theory. As mentioned by Walter Rauschenbusch in one of his books entitled A Theology for the Social Gospel, when Christianity is applied to societal issues such as poverty, labor exploitation, and inequality, urging people of faith to realize God's kingdom through effective human action for justice and equality, they are essentially engaged in what I would call the gospel of freedom, which is a living, breathing call of God to every unjust, violent pharaoh of society. And in so doing, we are telling them to let my people go. Its trajectory, and this is really important, extends far back in history to the likes of Reverdy Ransom and Adam Clayton Powell Jr. or Sr. in New York, Abyssinian Baptist Church, to Nanny Helen Burroughs, to Ida B. Wells, Mordecai Johnson, Howard Thurman, women such as Pauli Murray, who was a civil rights lawyer and an Episcopal priest, who, in emphasizing reconciliation, racial justice, and the spiritual dimensions of liberation work, also spoke extensively about colonialism, anti-black racism, and global human rights. She often linked U.S. struggles to anti-colonial movements abroad. And while she did not specifically address the question of Israel and Palestine, given her deep Christian and human rights commitments, it is inconceivable to me that she would not have approached this conflict through a lens of universal human dignity and opposition to racism and state violence. Then we have individuals like Mrs. Coretta Scott King. In 1989, she delivered a speech in California at Sinai Temple, and she urged the Jewish community to press Israel to negotiate with Palestinians for a peaceful and equitable solution, explicitly including a homeland for Palestinians. And this is what she said in making this urgent request or appeal. She said, "Surely, if you believe in a place for yourselves, you must believe in a place for others." She addressed the issue of othering. And part of her lifelong commitment was to combat this sense of othering, because othering really is just another expression of the absence of love and violence. And so she was well within the framework of her husband's ministry, as well as her own emotional and psychological understandings of what was needed and what is still needed today. And so when we think about those who believe and practice faith and the love of God and who believe in freedom, we know that we cannot afford to sit idly by while the world seems to be breaking apart. What's breaking the world apart is anti-black racism, as it has been said, anti-Semitism, ethno-religious bigotry, nationalistic ideologies, including Christian nationalism, some expressions of Zionism that justify harm towards the other. All of these things we are called today together in an effort to show the world and to show Charlotteans that we are committed to mending these hostilities, to finding ways to express this gospel of freedom non-violently, even as we speak truthfully, and even sometimes as we may find it expedient even to disagree. To repair and restore the world, tikkun olam. This is an understanding, an idea from our Jewish brothers and sisters who are here tonight, some of whom I'm sure are not in agreement with some of what we have already spoken, and we're glad that you're here. But we believe that repairing and restoring the world requires the kind of courage and faith and love that moves mountains, that builds bridges, that speaks and challenges offenses, that rights wrongs, that demands courageous leadership, and most of all, that revives the sense of conscience that seems to have been deadened in the lives of so many who feel that their peace and their security is all that matters. If we have faith in God, none of what I have said is optional. I want to mention something that I did not write, but it feels like I should say it very quickly. During one of my visits to Israel, as I was sailing on the Sea of Galilee with my travel colleagues and enjoying those who were living in the kibbutzim off the sea, and I said to myself, this is a wonderful way for our Jewish brothers and sisters to live and find peace and security in the midst of the storms that seem to swirl around their lives. And I was happy for those whom I saw, and then I experienced a sense of sadness, because I thought to myself, having visited other areas in the West Bank just prior to that, wouldn't it be wonderful if more of our Jewish brothers and sisters, like some who are here tonight, wanted the same experience for Palestinians as they have been able to experience for themselves. When I think about this challenge, I think about Moses confronting Pharaoh. I think about Jesus who in the four Gospels of the New Testament in righteous anger went into the temple as a Jew and confronted fellow Jews because they were exploiting at the money changers' tables those who needed to exchange their resources in order to worship. I think about the courage that Jesus had. I think about a person who I admire so deeply named Steve Biko, who challenged South African apartheid with his intellectual message of black consciousness, which grew out of the major themes of black nationalism and black power. I grew up hearing my older uncles and aunties quoting something that emerged out of the black consciousness movement in South Africa. Black is beautiful. And then there were people like James Brown, who often would encourage us to sing, say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud.
Amen. Yes.
We should all be proud.
Yes.
And the goal that we have tonight as we move along is to say, how can we work together to make each other proud? How can I share with my Jewish brothers and sisters their sense of need, of security and peace and identity and joy over Jewishness, and celebrate my Muslim brothers and sisters in the same way that I celebrate my own history? This, in summation, is what we mean tonight when we talk about the black experience. It is not about phenotype. It is not about melanin in the skin. It is about an experience that pursues harmony, justice, and peace for all. This is our history. This is our legacy. And having said that, we'll leave the rest for our Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to let everybody take a minute if you would like to take a picture of this graph. It shows Arab and French, the British negotiation timeline. And it goes into great detail of some history. All right. I wanted to thank you all for taking the time to be here today.
All right, folks, once again, you're watching this interfaith panel, basically talking about the impact of various current events and bringing that faith dialogue into the mix. You saw there was a Q&A session they were just about to tee up. Before we get to that, we'll take a break here on Live Impact. We'll be back in 2 minutes with more here. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Live Impact News. We're turning back to our feed coming to us out of the Beatties Ford Road area of Charlotte. This is Friendship Missionary Baptist Church. You're about to see in our 3-box in the main box a panel that's happening, that's underway, interfaith panel, and it is centered on the impact of current events and also bringing some context to the situation. This panel is called The Black Experience, Leadership, Palestine, and Truth-Telling. We'll listen in right now.
For many people living in Israel itself and also for many people living in the West Bank. So we took a taxi to one of the checkpoints, and it turns out that my student visa had expired. And the soldiers there, the Israeli soldiers, were trying to use this as a pretext for denying our whole group of 4 or 5 students entry into it. But just at that same moment, by a stroke of really terrific luck, a man named Ryland Paulson happened to drive up. Ryland Paulson was then the head of the South African consulate to Palestine. And I had met him in Ramallah in the West Bank about 6 weeks earlier, and we had a nice conversation. He recognized me from that encounter, vouched for me, and then we all piled into his car, and we ended up getting a tour of Gaza City from the head of the South African consulate to Palestine. And as a student, growing up in college in the late 1980s as an undergraduate, the cause of South African liberation was our primary sort of focus, our primary political activism. And the system of apartheid was very much the yardstick by which we had measured other expressions of injustice. At the same time, though, I was studying the Nazi Holocaust, which was also presented as the standard bearer for mass violence, atrocity, and genocide. During this trip, and I know we're supposed to keep this quick, so I'll wrap this up. We saw the prison camp that Gaza was becoming, and we saw that empty hotels that had been built in a moment of promise that were employing no one, poverty in the streets. He showed us all the injustices that were there, and he said this thing that has stuck with me ever since. I won't be able to quote him exactly, but what he said was, what Palestinians were experiencing in that moment in Gaza was as bad as what they had experienced under apartheid. And that turned my whole sense of yardsticks and measuring and ordering atrocities and privileging one over another, really on its head. And for me, it taught me a lot about the Holocaust and the way we should be thinking about the Holocaust as not as a tragedy that should be elevated and sometimes weaponized in order to diminish other people's suffering, but as a door, as a gateway, as an opening to shed light on the injustices facing other people. So for me, that was just really one of those foundational moments that led me into Palestinian solidarity.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing. It takes a lot of bravery and it takes a lot of courage. And one thing I want to say, following this discussion today, I will not be shocked if friendship receives maybe some pressure. And what that pressure is going to look like is you having to make a choice. You have to make a choice on where you stand with humanity. And I think these are some tactics that are used and that are strong. But right now with this discussion and learning from each other's lived experiences, we have the opportunity to be able to hear from each other, talk with each other, and share the experiences we have here in the States and as well as in our travels overseas. And with this pressure, I want us to be able to have courage and belief in our communities to receive support as we further educate ourselves. I have a question for Jabril, and how can Muslim communities strengthen interfaith partnerships?
The easy answer is what we're doing tonight. There's been many in the Muslim community, some are here tonight, that have spent money, spent time in interfaith organizations and circles, only to just show up, smile, try to hum kumbaya, but leave feeling empty, because you know there's issues that we need to discuss. And there's some issues that have been sanctioned for 30, 40 years that some of these groups will address. But when you have genocide going on, when you have war after war going on, and relatives in this community being killed, one in particular just last week, a whole family killed. These are things that are on our hearts and minds, and if we can't come together and speak honest about these things in a way that we're respecting everyone's humanity and concerns, then we have nothing to build on. But if we can come together like we are here tonight, being honest and open and respectful of all people, we have something to build on, and that's the future of our interfaith community, our Abrahamic faith, and it would also inspire more of the Muslim community to come out and say, well, they really do care.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Paul, I have a question for you. How can faith communities today more effectively turn shared spiritual values into tangible action for justice?
Repeat the last part, Leila.
So how can faith communities today more effectively turn shared spiritual values into tangible action?
Very good question. I was on a call last night with some Muslim scholars, and I learned a great deal from them about Western philosophy, about Descartes, about David Hume, about Kierkegaard. I think we have to abandon some of our preconceived ideas that we are more intelligent, brighter, have more knowledge, more sophistication than some of our Muslim brothers and sisters. They have a lot to teach us. And many of our ideas that we're so proud of that come from the Western world actually did not originate in the Western world. They originated with our Muslim brothers and sisters east of the Western world. So that's one of the things that we can do. We can learn to appreciate the fact that we don't know everything, and that many of the things that we have been taught were taught from a standpoint of limitation. Perhaps not necessarily from the standpoint of ill intent, but certainly a lack of knowledge. And it's up to us to pursue the opportunities in order to acquire a deeper level of appreciation and understanding, so we can understand truly this world is singular. It is not plural. We talk about pluralism and we embrace it, but at the end of the day, we have to live and function together. I wish I could say that more eloquently, but that's the best way we can say it tonight.
Thank you. Thank you all. We're going to open up now for the Q&A. Let's take 2 people at a time to come.
All right, and folks, before we get to the next portion here of this question and answer session, we'll take a break. We'll be back in 2 minutes with more from this panel. All right, folks, back here with the Live Impact News studio and our live feed out of Charlotte here. We've got an interfaith panel, which is underway, discussing the impacts of current events. And there's definitely a faith lens to this, but we're in a Q&A portion of this. And folks from the actual audience, from the public, are getting to ask the panel members some questions. So let's listen in right now.
Justified as an act of self-defense, where not both Nazi Germany and Israel and many other states say they're doing this because they feel that the group they're attacking represents an existential threat to themselves, so they're going to act either in retaliation or in a premature strike to protect the nation that they feel they're responsible for. They also are doing this work in order to preserve a certain level of racial purity. There's, with both societies, again, and this is really something that John Cox, who's an expert in genocide, can speak to, but so many of these societies that perpetuate genocide are deeply nationalistic and hold a sense of racial superiority about themselves that they believe is subject to degradation through racial mixing. And these acts of genocide are meant in many ways as an act of ethnic cleansing or racial cleansing, trying to eliminate what are perceived as racial threats. And the last piece I think that unifies them is that they often act out of a sense of grievance. So in Nazi Germany, there was a sense of grievance as a holdover of World War I, where many Germans felt they were given a raw deal at the end of that war, and thus were acting out of that. And the attacks of October 7th, the response has been so overwhelming, but it is still seen in many ways as a form of retribution for that violence. So I think there's many parallels, but not just limited to Nazi Germany, but to many genocides.
The idea of a promised land is not really something, it's not an Islamic perspective. We do believe there was a tribe of Israel, and God favored them many times, and there was covenants were broken, but there never was like a land called Israel. If you want to go to modern day, even if there were, if you want to do the promised land argument, many of the Jews today are not the Jews of the Bible. Many are converts, which is fine. You can convert and you can be a Jew, but you're not the Jews of the Bible. There's a difference there. With that being said, as Muslims and people who strive for justice, every human being should be safe no matter where you are in the world. Whether it's Germany, whether it's New York, whether it's Palestine, Israel, wherever you are, you should be safe. You should not have to go to an area and displace someone else to be safe. To me, that is anti-Semitic or whatever we're going to call it. That is the fact that you think that person can't be safe unless they go somewhere else and displace them. That is not a good idea. It's not a just idea. That person should be safe. You should be safe wherever you are in this world. You shouldn't have to go anywhere else.
Alrighty, we'll take 2 more questions. Okay, come on up.
Hello, thank you for hosting this event. And I want to just point out a couple of things when we use the term Zionist, that there are many different types of Zionists in the world. Examples: Jewish Zionists, Christian Zionists, Muslim Zionists, white, black, Indian, Asian. So I think if we characterize a group of people, we need to understand the scope of the characterization, that it's not restricted to one specific group of people. We have a short time, so I'll keep it short. I was interested to hear your opinions about the many Arab, Muslim, and specifically Palestinian voices whose opinions and interpretation of events contradict what we've heard here from you tonight. And I have numerous examples, but I'll just share one with you. Bassem E. is a Palestinian journalist. I followed him for several years. Peace activist, human rights advocate. He grew up in UNRWA camp, refugee camp. He started an organization of his own that looks at violation of human rights by the Palestinian Authority. And he sent several articles, and one of the articles he wrote, which was several years ago, was Israel is not an apartheid state. And I would state that the experience you shared about being on the Sea of Galilee and enjoying your experience does not reflect an apartheid environment in Israel. And my second comment is, one of his other articles was, we Palestinians hold the key to a better future. And I think if you look historically at how the status and the future of the Palestinian community has been manipulated by other people in the areas around Israel, wars in 1948, 67, 73, their voice was not being heard. And so my question is how you think that has impacted where they are today. Thank you again.
Thank you. I think as a Palestinian, I could dive into this first. I appreciate your viewpoint and your question, and to stay on track of the flow of your question, I'm gonna go into detail of what apartheid looks like in Palestine, what it has been called under international law by the UN, and some experiences that we can see it now from Palestinians. For example, with Iran and the bombs that we're seeing, whether you're a Palestinian in the 48 areas, which you should be protected as an Israeli citizen, or as a Palestinian living in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip, what this looks like is you don't have access to bomb shelters, you don't have access to the Iron Dome, it does not cover or protect your area and territory. And I think with apartheid being an example, you can see it in Khalil, or called Hebron, segregated roads, the lack of the right to vote, and the not having access to movement. If you hold the Palestinian ID, my grandmother, for example, when we both went, I don't hold one, but I was able to go to Jerusalem with my American passport, and my grandmother could not pray or enter Jerusalem because of her Palestinian ID. But when you look into this, what about Israeli Palestinians? Can they move? Can they move within the 48 territories? And the answer is no. And why is there this force of not being able to move? And it's intentional. That's what we call occupation. That's what we call apartheid. And I agree with you. There's Zionists everywhere. Zionism is an ideology. It's not a race. It doesn't cover a religion. You can be from anywhere and have any identity and call yourself Zionism. And what Zionism is, for those who may be hearing this term for the first time, it's the belief in a Jewish state. And for me, I was raised with Palestine being a state for Christians, Muslims, and Jews. Our old jewelry and our old books, our family archives, hold historical families that come from all three religions. So when we dive in and we look into the Zionist ideology, one thing that I always like to think about and to dive into is paid gangs, paid spies by the state of Israel, and how they maneuver in Gaza. We saw a very, very well-known journalist, Saleh, get killed by a Palestinian gang that was paid by the state of Israel. And when you have limited access to movement, limited access to food, limited access to water, you need to survive. And unfortunately, we see the change in our own people. We see it with our Palestinian Authority, and we see it within our communities, how people move when they are trying to live and what that looks like. I want to acknowledge one thing too, where I grew up here in Charlotte. I'm going to keep this short so we can get to you, sir. But when I see our Jewish community, I always ask them where they're from, because our Jewish community, they have backgrounds. I'm Muslim, and we have to bury and learn the Jewish tradition of burying a loved one because somebody from our family, her mother was Jewish, and she was a Holocaust survivor. So Our perception as Palestinians is you can be Jewish, and you can be from any country, but Zionism is the underlying principle that a lot of us in our community cannot align with based off of the repercussions of what is done with the Zionist faith. So I appreciate it, and I'd love to talk more with you after this. I want to give the gentleman behind you a chance to ask a question. Thank you.
Can I respond real quick?
I'm going to get his question, and then we can. And this will be our last question for this evening as well.
I want to challenge the acceptance of the term genocide that each of you has used as though what's occurring in Gaza today is a genocide. It's very much contested. Many scholars, politicians around the world do not just say genocide is happening and that's it. That's the way you said it. It's genocide. I think that's not right. What you're seeing is sorry?
No.
Can I finish?
Yes, sir.
Sure.
Yes. Genocide is a legal term that involves an intent to remove, kill a particular ethnic group with intent. The fact that a country like Israel is invaded and fights back, and in the fight back, people are killed. That's not genocide. That's war. Every war has people who are killed. That's not genocide. And I would ask you one final question related to that is, and perhaps for Palestinians, is why do the Hamas provoke an Israeli response that was known? They have 300 miles of tunnels under Gaza, probably the best bomb shelters in the world. Why do they not let the women and children of Gaza seek safety in those? So, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll let you handle genocide. I'm going to respond to
I think we'll all have a response on this question.
Okay, and then after their response, we're going to call it an evening. Please make sure you grab some sandwiches in any of your mess. Throw it away. Thank you.
First, quickly, I want to respond to Zionism. Yes, I think most people who study and look and meet people in the whole 9 yards, there's different levels and different ways people can identify with Zionism. I believe there's even Christians who are Zionists and also anti-Semitic because they have some kind of Messianic vision for supporting Israel. All that can be true. But at the end of the day, when you look at Palestine, just like here in America, you can be a hardcore racist, or you can just be lingering with some of the effects of racism and not willing to deal with it. That's still racism, and you still need to deal with it. You can be a Zionist who supports a two-state solution, but you don't support equal rights for Palestinians. So no matter what kind of Zionist you are, Palestinians suffer from all of it. And that's, I know it's a struggle. Look, white Americans in this country have had to come to grips with racism the same way, and it's not easy. And if I have Jewish friends who are struggling with that realization, I'm patient with them. Because I know it's not an easy process of realizing what you've been taught is wrong, just like many white Americans in this country have been taught the wrong thing for a long time, and they had to come to grips with it. Secondly, about the genocide question, I'll be quick as well. Have you seen any buildings left in Gaza? Have you actually looked at the numbers before you say it's not a genocide?
I just used perplexity. Anybody use perplexity? Any students? I love perplexity. And there was an article that I read that was in the New York Times in July 2025. A gentleman named Omer Bartov, the professor of Holocaust. You probably know him. You're professors as well. You guys know each other well. Work together. He's at Brown University, and he wrote a widely discussed essay for the New York Times in July 2025 entitled, "I'm a Genocide Scholar. I know it when I see it." Now, I'm not going to debate that. I'm just going to say, as you said, it is an issue of debate. I think the larger question for many of us is, why do we have to brutally kill when it is very clear the other side that you are using weapons against is largely women and children. I just want to ask that question and appeal to our sense of moral consciousness. Part of this conversation tonight, was not to, in my opinion, Layla, was not to get into a back and forth, but to challenge one another to think more deeply and to cultivate the kind of empathy that we all need. I think if we focus on that, that will help us move past some of the debatable issues and recognize each other's humanity, and then say to ourselves, how do I defend and preserve and protect humanity, not just your humanity, for in protecting you, I protect myself. So there is a self-interest that we should have as we wrestle with these definitions and instances and crimes. There's a long history, and I'm convinced, and I'll say this and stop, the vast majority of persons who enter into debates probably don't even know the history. They know a snippet or sections or slices of history. And so we need to have these conversations more fully to educate ourselves. In 10 seconds or less, that chart that was put up goes all the way back to 1914. It deals with the origin of the hostilities that developed over years between the Arab community and the Jewish community. And it didn't start with Arabs. It started with European anti-Semitism. And that led to crises after crises after crises. So sometimes if you want to deal with an issue, we've got to go down to the root and learn where these things come from so we don't end up in these frivolous and long-winded debates that actually don't achieve the outcomes that we should be pursuing.
I'll keep this response very quick. Just as we recognize that Holocaust denial is still very real in our world and is an expression of anti-Semitism, denial of the Palestinian genocide is a manifestation of anti-Palestinian racism. The record is very, very clear, and as John Cox, myself, Victoria Sanford wrote in a legal brief back in late October, early November 2023, and as I testified in federal court against the Biden administration in January of 24, and as thousands of scholars of genocide, of major scholarly organizations of genocide, as many UN bodies and international courts have said, the case for genocide is very, very strong. The reason why the legal definition under the 1948 Convention of Genocide was constructed in the way that it was to really protect the Western powers and the Western states. This question of intent was put in place deliberately. You can read the conversations, the debates I have from that time period. It was put in such a way as to make the standards so high that it would protect the political interests of the major powers. But like we know when we see racism, we know it when we see it. We know genocide when we see it. And so there's no question. And to raise that type of challenge, I think we need to name it for what it is, just as we would name Holocaust denial for what it is. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of your time, and to our panelists for making it out today and to educating our community. I appreciate all of the questions and for everyone's presence here tonight. I hope that this could be a continued event that we do, whether we're in this space or invited into others, because this is a conversation that, as we can tell, it needs to be talked about. And I really love being able to hear from all of you and from learning from each of our panelists. I just want to end out tonight by saying one thing. And given that it's Women's History Month, given the news that we're seeing overseas, as a Palestinian Muslim woman, I find it deeply inappropriate to weaponize my pain or my identity against those who protect me, being Palestinian men. The United States, Israel, has never protected a woman like me. I appreciate you all, and I appreciate your presence. Thank you, guys.
All right, and it looks like this event is now wrapping up. Once again, that was in the Beatties Ford Road area, Friendship Missionary Baptist Church. And we'll have much more for you on this event tonight at 11 on our newscast, because there was a portion that we weren't able to carry for you in the beginning just because we weren't streaming at that time because it started at 6:30. So with that, we'll take a quick break. We'll see you in 2 minutes with more Live Impact News. Hi, folks. Welcome back to Live Impact News. We just got some breaking news into our Live Impact News studio regarding a homicide scene, which is underway right now in East Charlotte. We've pulled up a map as we still do not have a crew there yet, but this is happening in the 5800 block of Albemarle Road. We are told that there was an assault with a deadly weapon call for service right around this area on Sunday. They said that there was somebody who was discovered with life-threatening injuries, who had sustained an apparent gunshot wound. That person went to the hospital, and we just learned apparently Tuesday that that person, 31-year-old Luis Daniel Gutierrez Mora, succumbed to his injuries and is now dead. CMPD says it's now handling this investigation as a homicide. So it sounds like this is a situation that spans multiple days in the sense that the actual call for service happened over the weekend. The person who was injured passed away just yesterday, and now tonight CMPD says that it is now looking into this as a homicide. As we get more information, we'll pass it along to you here in the Live Impact News studio. Meantime, we'll take another break. We'll be back in 2 minutes with some of our feeds we're watching around the area. All right, folks, welcome back here to Live Impact News. We're turning now to our live feed from Washington, D.C. Discussions are underway on the U.S. Senate floor. Of note, we are not currently seeing any discussions about the funding for DHS, as we are past a month now under this partial government shutdown. Let's listen in now to the discussions on the floor.
Ford. Another former town clerk wrote, "I'm thoroughly horrified by the onerous requirements for registering to vote. As a former town clerk, I've always believed that a well-functioning democracy should do everything in its power to encourage people to vote, not throw up roadblocks that effectively block millions of people from doing so. Though no one wants non-citizens to be allowed to vote in federal elections, multiple studies have demonstrated that this is an extremely rare event. From a cost-benefit standpoint, the Save America Act makes no sense. I believe the risk of harm to millions of current and future voters vastly outweighs the risk of non-citizen voting, which is a relatively minimal issue." Mr. President, that's what's called Vermont common sense. If Congress and the public believe that showing a valid ID at the polling place is something that should be implemented across the country, this should be proposed in new legislation that will be delayed until at least 2028 so that everyone is given the opportunity to obtain a federal identification card, which can be used for the purposes of voting. It's ironic that the Republicans who have historically been opposed to a national ID card are now the ones screaming the loudest for documentation. You know, there's absolutely no reason that the bill should specify that a valid driver's license or a real ID card should not qualify as sufficient documentation to establish one's eligibility to vote. I believe this is simply a callous attempt to disenfranchise millions of people of color and those of lower socioeconomic status, as well as women who have chosen to change their names upon marriage. This clerk continued, another clerk, as a former town clerk who managed many federal elections over the course of my career. I always felt comfortable with the Vermont registration form that asked a number of questions of people who are required to sign an affidavit as to the accuracy of their residency and citizen status. The penalties for perjury are severe, and there's little to no incentive for a non-citizen to risk their status in the United States by illegally attempting to vote. Many voter registrations take place through the Department of Motor Vehicles, and the creation of the so-called motor voter system has vastly improved the ability of officials to ensure that voter lists are accurate and up to date. Additionally, the Vermont Election Management System is an online registration system that requires either a Social Security number that can be cross-checked or a valid Vermont driver's license number. Both of these systems are fully functional in Vermont and offer convenience for residents as well as enhanced accuracy in the maintenance of voter lists and the conduct of elections. The clerk continues, I would venture to suggest that the SAVE Act in its current form would render those systems obsolete and create a huge problem for town clerks, members of the Board of Civil Authority, and voters by disallowing driver's licenses and real ID cards as an acceptable form of identification. Both of these systems would be rendered unusable. Voters in my state, they've called, they've emailed, and they've written to me with their concerns. Another Vermonter, Mr. President, Vermonter from Stowe. I'm writing to voice my concern over the protection of my voting rights and the voting rights of millions of other married women. I recently needed to renew my passport. I fortunately have my original birth certificate, but found out I no longer had an original copy of my marriage license. It took me significant time, effort, and money to obtain the original, and then to have the passport expedited in order to get it on time for my trip. We are talking months. I was fortunate that I had my birth certificate, and as I would imagine that many people do not. In her view, this bill is outrageous. One Vermonter in Heinsberg said, "I'm hearing rumblings that the Senate will be taking action on the SAVE Act that unfortunately passed in the House. This, in this person's view, is a voter suppression bill. Personally, I've already purchased copies of my birth certificate and my marriage license, even though I have a passport, because I wanted to be damn sure I can vote. But obviously, there are many people who won't be able to access their needed proof of eligibility. If this bill goes through, and will therefore be denied one of their basic rights as an Americans. I'm pretty sure you are going to vote no on this," she says to me. "I just wanted to let you know that I'm against it too." And by the way, she's right. I want this Vermonter to know they're right. Another voter in Winooski, please vote no to the SAVE Act. It's a solution in search of a problem, because voting by undocumented people does not happen in any significant degree in this country. It will disenfranchise millions of voters. It's essentially a poll tax on anyone who has changed their name at any point in their life, which means many women, amongst others, will be unable to vote. We have watched SCOTUS erode the Voting Rights Act of 1965 by degrees. The SAVE Act will be a death blow, in the opinion of this writer. The work of so many to enable people to vote, that some even sacrifice their life for, is further endangered by the lies about this act. Mr. President, I'm listening to my constituents. We all need to listen to our constituents and our local leaders. We cannot advance a bill that will disenfranchise voters. We cannot block access to the ballot box. We cannot limit voices, nor can we stop, nor should we stop, nor should we impede people from voting. I cannot and will not support the SAVE Act. Mr. President, I want to speak on the topic of the war in Iran. Mr. President, as I am standing here, 3,000 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne are on their way to Iran. These are elite paratroopers trained to jump into enemy-held territory. They will join 5,000 Marines being sent from Japan and California. How did we get here? On February 28th, President Trump launched this war, something he is now calling an excursion, with a massive display of U.S. military power and dominance. It was stunning. In the opening days, more than 8,000 targets were struck in Iran. More than 120 Iranian vessels were damaged or destroyed, nearly eliminating Iran's ability to launch drones and missiles. Iran's military and civilian leadership was decapitated, and that includes the then Ayatollah, who was the leader, now replaced by his son. It was an incredible demonstration of military power and execution of military might, just like Midnight Hammer was in June. Things are different today. We face something completely unpredictable, and we've had no discussion or debate about it. We face what has happened in Iraq and what has happened in Afghanistan, and that is a country with limited power has asymmetric power. It's confronting us with the limits of what can be accomplished with military power. Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz. And to the shock of most Americans, there appears to have been very little, if any, planning on the part of the folks who pushed us into war about what would happen when the strait was closed. The Iranians really don't need massive military power to keep the strait closed. A drone strike, a mine that hits a vessel that is going through, whether escorted or not, means that Iran has a vote. They can attack. It also means international shippers have a vote. Do they want to risk their cargo and their crew when that's an active military combat zone? They've answered that. No. There are hundreds of oil-carrying cargo vessels on both sides of the strait that won't proceed through. The president has to make a major decision. We have to make a major decision. His decision appears to be that he will escalate this war. He will put his faith that there is a military solution to resolving an outcome. That's despite the experience we've had where we've consistently been shown the limitations of what can be accomplished with our extraordinary military. And by all indications, the president has chosen a path of escalation. The Marines I mentioned, the paratroopers I mentioned, the massing of our military assets in the region, the attacks I outlined, and the $200 billion request that is coming our way. That's an extraordinary request of the American taxpayer. It's $60 billion more than President Bush requested in his supplemental to fund the opening months of the Iraq invasion in 2003. Escalation at this point, and that's the decision that is upon us, is going to be irresistible. And that is in the context of the president getting intelligence assessments from our intelligence community, as well as from the Israeli intelligence community, that the hoped-for collapse of the Iranian regime will not occur. It's intact. They've lost many of their leaders. They've replaced all of those leaders who they've lost. So do we expect that this paratroop expedition, this Marine expedition, can change that? That's a question that this body must debate. One of the weaknesses of our position right now is that the president did bypass Congress in making his decision to go on this, quote, expedition. The president also bypassed the American people by not addressing them and outlining with clarity the goals that he seeks to accomplish and the means by which he hopes to accomplish them, and the expectation of the sacrifices that American citizens will have to make in order to achieve his goals. And in a democracy, this is not just something that is done because it's nice to do. In a democracy, public backing for a war is not optional. It's a strategic necessity for success. There has been no effort to engage the public, and indeed, public opinion of the wisdom of this shows that barely 40% of Americans support this war. and more than 60% think our military action in Iraq has been excessive. Mr. President, this reservation that we're seeing on the part of the American people about this war is understandable. There's been no explanation about how it will, the goals and the expectation about an outcome. And there's been no candor about what this war will cost. $200 billion as a supplemental is a down payment on more to come. $200 billion is literally a $1,400 tax on every single American household. The average American family is also going to pay an extra $2,000 at the pump with the increase in gas prices. Families in Vermont are going to pay $1,000 more to heat their homes. Our small farmers in Vermont and in your state, Mr. President, are going to pay about 35% more for fertilizer just as planting season begins. We owe candor to the American people when it comes to what is going to be required for this war. But the other essential obligation we have in making a decision about going to war is to the men and women we will ask to go to war because of our decision or because of our indecision. When I was first in Congress, Mr. President, I attended the funeral of a young Vermont Marine. He died at the age of 21 in the siege of Fallujah. He died on Thanksgiving Day. We all honor him as a hero, just like the other Vermonters that fell in post-9/11 wars. And in Vermont, at that point, we had the highest casualty rate on a per capita population basis of any state in the nation. We're so proud of the commitment of service that our young Vermonters give to our country. They step up because they believe in us. They believe that in a democracy, they serve us by volunteering, and they subject themselves to the authority of the commander-in-chief, a civilian, and they will show up and they will serve at the call of the commander-in-chief. We in Congress have a role to play, and it's to weigh in on the decision of where and when we will send young men and women into harm's way. They do their job. We're not doing our job. We've had no hearings. We've had no debate. We've had no discussion. It's just happening. We're sleepwalking passively into a war that could be yet another war in the Middle East. Yes, it is true. The Iranian regime is dangerous. Saddam's regime was dangerous. The Taliban was dangerous. In the cases of of Iraq and Afghanistan, we did escalate, and we stayed.
Sorry about that, folks. Looks like we just lost that feed. We'll see if we can try to get it back there from the Senate floor, but you were just hearing from the senator from Maine. And he was pretty critical, we heard, about the Iran war and the additional deployments of troops. In fact, we just reported for you last night that more than 1,000 of the new troops are coming from Fort Bragg here in North Carolina. He was also pretty critical, too, of the ongoing shutdown. Let's go ahead and take a break. Back in 2 minutes with more Live Impact News. Sorry about that feed. All right, folks, welcome back to Live Impact News. We did get that Senate feedback for you where Vermont Senator Peter Welch was making some comments. We heard him talking about the Save America Voting Act, seemed pretty critical on that. Also criticizing, when we lost our feed in that moment, the latest actions in the Iran war, including deployments of more troops, including more than 1,000 from the 82nd, which is out of Fort Bragg here in North Carolina. Let's listen in right now.
Of what we are asking the young men and women of this country to subject themselves to. Mr. President, we owe them more than that. I yield back.
All right, folks, while we are waiting for potentially the next speaker to come to the Senate floor, we'll go ahead and take a look at the very latest commentary from LA. We had mentioned today the big news about the verdict in the Meta and YouTube trial. The social media platforms have been found negligent in their operations and basically how they have been accused here of sucking users in, causing social media addiction, as this one plaintiff said. Harming her mental health was another claim we saw in this suit. We are hearing from some of the folks who say that they've been fighting against some of the practices of these social media companies. Let's listen in right now. We'll take a break. All right, sorry. We're having some issues here with our video. We appreciate your patience. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in 2 minutes. Hopefully, we'll get that social media trial update for you. Was it rolling? Oh, we got it now. All right, let's go to it now.
I think we're all out of words to express what we feel, and being in that courtroom and hearing those answers from the jury, it's really validated, been a complete validation of what we've been screaming on the top of roofs about for years. This was not this was a conscious decision that they made. It was not an accident, and parents are not to blame. That's for sure. They knew the harm, right? They knew the damage. They assess the risk and they move forward anyway. And from my opinion, that's, that's incorrigible. And this is about a thing of being right or wrong. This is not about some business decision. There's a right thing to do and a wrong thing to do, and they are on the wrong side. So for them, for the big tech executives, I want to say something. Stop blaming the parents. It's on you. And this is what this is showing today. And for parents, we now know that they were manipulating our children for profits while we were watching and trying to keep our families safe. They are the predators. A little bit more.
No more looking away.
Yeah, parents, no more looking away. We're headed, this is not over. We know this is a long game. We're headed to D.C. with the evidence we have in hand and this verdict, and we're demanding safety protections and legislation to keep kids safe online from our legislators. And we have a message for them. We don't want any more hearings. We don't want any more loopholes in these bills. We don't want any more of them shielding big tech. Enough is enough. We want them to do their jobs and keep American families safe. And I think what we found right now is big tech is predator number one right now in this world. So I want to say that we're not going to give up. This is not a sprint. It's not even a marathon. This is freaking, Iron Man, okay? And we are not giving up till we get to the finish line.
And for everybody on Capitol Hill, for everybody on...
Can we have your name, please?
Oh, excuse me. Juliana Arnold.
And you're a mother of?
Coco.
Were you part of this lawsuit?
Hold on.
No, we're going to have another statement and then we can take questions.
In a second.
I want everybody here, every parent here, to say their child's name. Annalise Shot, Colorado.
Coco Conar, Los Angeles.
Alexandra Hinks, Summerfeld.
England Roberts, Louisiana.
Alexander Neville, Orange County, California.
Annalise Shot, Colorado.
Riley Bassford, Potsdam, New York.
Eric Robinson, Santa Monica, California.
We have fought on Capitol Hill to get reforms through. Nobody heard us. Capitol Hill, hear us now. If it was not for these trial lawyers to get us to this place in time, we would not have this opportunity today to show the world the harms that big tech knew they were doing. So enough. Invite us parents to Capitol Hill. Let's fix this. Big tech, us. Let's make this world a better place. But parents, we need you to join in with us because it stops today. Big tech, your gig is over.
Yep. Hey, boy, God damn it.
Say your name. Oh,
what's that?
Lori Shot, Colorado.
So we'll take a couple of questions and then we got to get them some lunch so they can get back to us.
All right, before we get to the question and answer portion here, we'll take another break. We'll be back in 2 minutes with more from this press conference with those parents. Okay, folks, welcome back. We're going to turn back to this press conference with parents remarking on the verdict that just came down in that landmark lawsuit on social media safety. If you're just kind of catching up on the headline today, a jury has found Meta and YouTube negligent in their social media safety, and jurors ended up awarding a plaintiff in this case $3 million in damages, finding Meta 70% responsible for harm that was caused to her. She talked about emotional stress and social media addiction that stemmed from social media platform use. YouTube was responsible for 30% of those damages. We are now in the portion where these parents who have felt the direct impact, they say, of social media harm on their children are taking questions from media. Let's listen in.
We are part of the JCCP, yeah.
Yes. What are your thoughts on age verification laws that are making their way through a bunch of states right now?
Well, you know, I think positively about them. Oh, sorry. I mean, I think that they're still new and we're figuring out how they would work and seeing what's going on in other countries that are implementing them. I think they have value, but I'd really still like to see these companies, you know, do what's needed to design their platforms safely for kids now and in the future. And as we move on to AI, that's even more important because kids are dying from AI chatbots as we speak. And that's not okay either. So we need to pull them in or it's just going to be out of control. So
I was honest about how old my son was 5 years ago. They knew he was 15 and still a predator with 50 fraudulent accounts was able to contact him and lure him and shame him in 5 hours. And they knew he was 15. They didn't let him use Marketplace because he wasn't old enough. Sure, I want age verification, but I know how smart these kids are. The platforms have to have a duty of care. They have to have transparency and reporting like every other industry. No more denying that they know what they are doing. They will stop at nothing to keep these kids' eyes on the screen, and that's the message. No family is alone in this. Every kid with a cell phone, with any device, with a camera and connection to the internet is in danger. Even if you're honest about their age, they do not care about these kids except for the money that they make for them. And it's time for the executive branch and the legislative branch to step up like the warriors have here and helped us and point out how far behind we are in having basic expectations that these companies protect children.
No more allowing them to self-regulate.
And can I just say that it's not fair? We shouldn't have to keep their customers safe on their product. Like, we shouldn't have to do that. That is not all down to the parents. They know this. And if social media was the gateway drug, AI is like the crack and heroin, and it moves fast. And tech moves very fast, and government does not. So they need to catch up, because by the time we get legislation, this is a victory, and we all feel vindicated. But until it has to be coupled with legislation, because this could just be like, okay, this is just the cost of doing business. And then they go back to doing it. And we hope that that's not the case. So it has to be coupled with legislation.
Yeah, and again, for our legislators, there are bills on the table in the House right now. The Senate version of the Kids Online Safety Act. We worked for years to get that passed in the Senate in 2024, 91-3. That's what we're looking for, that version, not the House version, but the Senate version. And also talking about what we're going to do about Section 230. Reforming Section 230 so we can have a voice and we can take action against these companies. That's the only way they're going to stop, is we hit them in their pocketbook. So we need to really look at this and understand where we are right now with this law that is 30 years old. We need to reform it, and we no more excuses anymore that it's just impossible. Nothing is impossible. And our kids' lives depend on it, and the future of this country depends on it, because those kids are going to be the ones that are supposed to lead our country. What are we going to do if they can't even think or talk and so depressed and anxious? I mean, come on, wake up.
Yeah, these social media companies have created an anxious generation. Our kids were the first cohort in the guinea pigs in this social media experiment, and we have lost a whole generation. And so it's not, it's not fair that what they're doing to our kids, and they know this. The tech companies are knowingly and intentionally preying upon the fragile psyche of teenage girls in particular, and they know this.
I want to say a word about
my name's
something-
Victoria Hinks.
I really want to say a word. I'm sorry. Victoria Hinks.
Sorry, Victoria Hinks from San Rafael, California.
I just want to say a word about something that is often forgotten about, which is challenges and dares that proliferate everywhere. My son died. Next month will be 16 years ago, before we had a clue of what these companies were doing. And just in the news, February 3rd, a 9-year-old girl in Texas died from, nowadays most of it's called the Blackout Challenge. When he died, it was called the choking game. It goes by hundreds of different names, and it's often misclassified as suicide. These are healthy kids who aren't depressed, who think they are trying something safe. And this is, COSA would cover it. The Senate version of COSA would help tremendously towards this. And I just wanted to chime in about us parents who are victims of a different kind of harm online that is often forgotten about. There is another family who lost a 12-year-old to, it wasn't publicized in the news, but they reached out to me personally, of the Blackout Challenge as well in February. So there are 2 deaths in February, one public on the record, one not, and thousands of them, so many misclassified as suicide. So I just want to shine a light on that as well while we have the spotlight, because those are going to trials separately, as I understand it.
Right.
And I'm not a plaintiff because of the age of he died too long ago at this point. But personally today, I feel vindicated. I knew something was wrong along the way. I had been doing research on my own.
She's a warrior, so stop making her do your job.
Exactly. And
I feel vindicated and validated.
One important thing that we need to remember, that was 16 years ago. The first should have been the last.
Yes.
And here we are. All right? And he was not even the first. So we can talk about choking challenges, fentanyl deaths, suicide, sextortion, name it. The first should have been the last, and it should have never happened to begin with. So let's do something about it.
It would have been YouTube at the
Thanks,
time,
everybody.
only because that was the only thing around. You've got to look at the context. 2010, I had a first-generation smartphone.
All right, some parents and loved ones of kids who they say have been impacted negatively by social media platforms very passionately commenting on the verdict that came down today. Once again, a jury finding Meta and YouTube negligent in their design and operation of their social media platforms. This stemming from a case where a plaintiff in this situation accused them of getting her addicted to their platforms and causing her emotional distress and harm. We're going to take a break here. We'll be back in 2 minutes with more Live Impact News. Folks, welcome back to Live Impact News. We're turning now to the U.S. Senate floor as discussions are still pretty active tonight. We've got the senator from Utah here, Mike Lee, making some remarks. Let's listen in.
Great Britain would withdraw and let us sort of govern ourselves. It was during those seasons in particular when our local self-rule, our colonial governments blossomed and Americans learned the art of local self-government. Then there would be other seasons, often during or in the aftermath of a large conflict, a large-scale, expensive war. The Crown and Parliament needed to raise funds for a war or to pay off war debts, and very often that's when they would send forth their swarms of regulators and tax collectors to the colonies, and they would start to hold the colonies with a tighter grip. And it was after several cycles of this drama, several cycles of this bipolar, passive-aggressive pattern that we faced from the Crown and Parliament that in 1776 we decided we had had enough. So, back to the early 1780s, we won the war. We instinctively put together a government that would not resemble the system that we lived under previously. And so we reflexively created this quite weak, anemic national government. And that, too, proved problematic. Within just a few years, it became apparent that we couldn't survive unless we had a national government that was capable of functioning as such, and that our national government couldn't function effectively as such, as a national government, unless it had a few powers, including the power to coordinate and regulate commerce between the states and with foreign nations, including the power to raise taxes, to, among other things, fund war efforts, fund national defense, assemble armies, and so forth. And so it was against that backdrop that our founding fathers came together in that hot summer of 1787 in Philadelphia. They had tried the previous year in 1786 to assemble in Annapolis to deal with the same inadequacies of the Articles of Confederation. They tried to convene, but they failed because they failed to achieve a quorum. When they got back together in the late, started to assemble in the late spring of 1787, it was still ostensibly with the mindset of amending the Articles of Confederation. It was not officially their objective to write an entirely new document and ordain an entirely new structure and framework for our government to operate, and yet that is what they came up with. I happen to believe that those men were special. They were unusually gifted, unusually well educated, both as compared to their day and ours in every respect. I believe they were wise men raised up by Almighty God to that very purpose, because it is my belief that this is a land that God has foreordained for liberty. And He did not intend the sons and daughters of the United States of America to live in captivity under the oppressive yoke of any tyrant, foreign or domestic. And that's why we're so blessed with those uniquely inspired and inspiring and gifted and well-educated individuals who understood liberty. They understood power. They understood its dark side, and they understood the potential for greatness of any society that can live under the rule of law with a system of laws that attempts to treat people equally. We may not be equal in our capacity, in our possessions, in our stations in life, but we are all treated equally in terms of the fact that we are all equally subject to a just system of laws. That, from the American Republic's very beginning, has been the objective. While we don't always live up to that to the degree that we should, that is the aspiration. And in that respect, it's something that differentiates us from so many other nations, and certainly did at the time. What they came up with in the end was a system of government that fairly allocated powers between the states and the federal sovereign. And it acknowledged that it's just as important for the federal government to have power, to be exclusive in its domain over the federal sovereign, as it is for the states to retain all other powers not granted to the federal sovereign. It is no less bad for the federal government to intrude upon the sovereignty of the states than it is for the states to intrude upon and undermine the sovereignty of the federal government. And that's why the Founding Fathers were inclined to devote so much time, attention, and brainpower to this difficult task of assigning to each level of government what its responsibilities would be, and then separately assigning to each branch of the federal government, the United States government.
And folks, time for another quick break. Back in 2 minutes, we'll hear more from Senator Mike Lee of Utah in just 2. Folks, we are turning back to our live feed from the U.S. Senate floor. We're still seeing discussions underway at this hour. Utah Senator Mike Lee has been making some remarks there on the floor. We'll listen in.
Daga tribe named Canasatego. Canasatego and Benjamin Franklin became friends, or at least allies. As Canasatego explained to Benjamin Franklin the secrets of the Iroquois Confederacy's longevity, its durability, its ability to defend itself, showing him that if you take a one arrow and you want to break it, it's easy to break a wooden arrow. But if you take a bundle of 5 or 6 of those thin wooden arrows, you bound them together, you can't just break them like you can easily break an arrow. Canasatego explained to Benjamin Franklin, this is the secret of the Iroquois Confederacy. If we were just one tribe, his tribe, the Onondaga tribe, if just the Onondaga tribe had to defend itself, it would be much easier for an enemy tribe to break. But when we are part of the Iroquois Confederacy, as they had been for centuries, we come together as a confederacy and defend ourselves when we're under common attack, when we need to defend ourselves, and that worked. In many respects, it was really much more the Iroquois Confederacy than the Swiss cantons that were an inspiration. After all, this was right here on the American continent. Individuals were able to meet and interact with them far more so than they would have ever had the opportunity to interact with government officials from the Swiss Confederacy. And in many respects, the U.S. government model closely resembles at least that spirit, at least that general concept embraced by the Iroquois Confederacy. So they wisely came together, and I believe it's fortunate. I believe it was providential and the product of a lot of divine inspiration and intervention that in that hot, sweltering summer of 1787 in Philadelphia, having convened ostensibly for the purpose of amending the Articles of Confederation to cover a couple of major deficits in the Articles of Confederation. They were just going to amend it. The concept was, we'll get together, we'll figure out how to deal with the interstate and foreign commerce problem, and with the ability to raise funds, the ability to raise an army and wage war when necessary, and a few things like that. And then they were going to move on, but they didn't do that. And I think that was another part of the pattern of divine providence intervening on behalf of the American people with these wise men raised up by Almighty God unto that very purpose, to bring about the result that they did. Finally, in mid-September of 1787, they signed that document. That document that has now persisted, that has now endured close to 2.5 centuries, and has helped foster the development of the greatest civilization the world has ever known. Without each of these ingredients, Mr. President, this combination of...
All right, folks, our time here on Live Impact is coming to a close. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. We'll see you for the news at 11 here on WCNC+.